Millionaire thought he was wedding an ugly woman in arranged marriage, but he was stunned when. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. Today, we're going to talk about how a millionaire thought he was marrying an ugly woman, but what happened next shocked everyone. Let's go back to our main character. Richard Ellis was a man who had everything. A mansion, expensive cars, a name that everyone knew, and money that could last several lifetimes. But there was one thing he didn't have, something he believed he could never have: love. Richard had grown cold over the years. The loss of his parents at a young age, the years spent building his empire, and the constant pressures of his business had taken away any real warmth he might have once had. Now, he only saw people as tools to help him build more wealth, more success, and more prestige. So when his family forced him into an arranged marriage, Richard didn't even bat an eye. It wasn't love that mattered to him. It was simply a matter of securing his family's legacy and keeping up appearances. The woman he was set to marry wasn't someone he'd even met before. All he knew was her name, Maya Thompson. A woman he was told was ordinary. Someone who didn't have the luxury or beauty of the women he was used to being surrounded by. Someone who wouldn't ask for too much, who wouldn't challenge his cold indifference. Maya was told that she would marry Richard for one reason only: to protect her family's inheritance, just like Richard was marrying her for the same reason. She was far from rich or glamorous, and she knew this was her only chance. No love, no romance. Just a business deal that would take her from poverty to wealth. The day they met was nothing special. Richard stood in a grand ballroom, his perfectly tailored suit a stark contrast to the modest dress Maya wore. She was quiet, unsure of herself, her nerves almost overwhelming as she shook Richard's hand. His icy demeanor made her stomach turn. This wasn't a man who cared for anyone, let alone her. He barely looked at her as they exchanged formal pleasantries. It was clear to both of them that they were just fulfilling obligations. They didn't care for each other. Maya felt like an outsider in a world that was alien to her, surrounded by people who oozed wealth and sophistication. Richard, on the other hand, looked at Maya and saw just another woman to check off his list, another step toward securing his empire. Yet, something about her made him pause. She wasn't what he expected. Maya wasn't a supermodel, and she didn't have the elegance of the women he'd been with before. But there was a quiet strength in her eyes, a sincerity that made him wonder if there was more to her than just a pawn in this arrangement. As the night wore on, Richard couldn't help but watch Maya. She was different from everyone else. While the others mingled, flaunting their wealth and their designer outfits, Maya stood off to the side, awkward but kind to everyone around her. There was something genuine about her, something Richard wasn't used to seeing in his world of calculated moves and superficial relationships. But he couldn't let it distract him. He had a plan, and love wasn't part of it. The next few weeks passed in a blur of meetings and dinners, all revolving around their impending marriage. Maya tried her best to fit into Richard's world, but she was never truly comfortable. She didn't belong there. She wasn't one of them. Richard, however, continued to remain distant, seeing Maya only as the means to an end. Yet, every time he saw her, he couldn't help but be intrigued. She had an honesty about her that he didn't know how to handle. The more time he spent with her, the more he began to notice little things. The way she smiled when she was nervous, the way she cared for everyone around her without asking for anything in return. But even as he felt this strange pull, he refused to admit it. He couldn't let himself be swayed by feelings he had long buried. Maya, too, had her doubts. She knew she was marrying Richard out of necessity, not love. But as their wedding day loomed closer, she couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, there was something real beneath the surface. The night before their wedding, Richard stood in front of the mirror in his penthouse, adjusting his tie. His reflection showed a man who had everything, yet felt empty inside. He looked at the invitation to his own wedding and wondered what it all meant. Would he ever feel something for Maya? Or would he go through with this marriage the same way he had lived his life, detached, cold, and alone? As he stood there, he felt a sudden wave of doubt, but quickly shook it off. he wasn't supposed to feel. Tomorrow, he would marry her. It was a business deal. Nothing more. He turned away from the mirror, unaware that this marriage, the one he thought was nothing more than a transaction, was about to change everything. And as for Maya, she was facing her own doubts. She was about to marry a man who saw her as nothing more than a contract. She had prepared herself for this moment, but in her heart, she couldn't help but wish for more. What if this marriage was more than just a way out? What if she could make him see her for who she really was? Only time would tell. And as the wedding approached, both of their worlds were about to be turned upside down. Would love find its way into their hearts? Or would this marriage remain a cold, calculated affair? The answer lay just around the corner. Stay tuned to find out. The next day arrived with an overwhelming sense of finality. Richard Ellis stood at the altar, his perfectly tailored suit fitting him as flawlessly as always. But today there was an unfamiliar tightness in his chest. He couldn't quite place it, but something was stirring inside him. The grand ballroom, filled with whispers and glances, seemed to fade away as he focused on Maya. She stood there in a simple white gown that, to him, felt like a stark contrast to the women he was used to. She wasn't the glamorous type, but there was something real about her. It confused him, and he didn't like it. But now, as she took her place beside him, all of his reservations were irrelevant. This was happening. The ceremony was brief. They exchanged vows that felt empty, both of them reciting words they didn't truly believe. The guests were oblivious, watching with the same indifference they showed to any business deal. This was just another transaction, wasn't it? As the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Richard glanced at Maya, unsure of what to expect from this new arrangement. Maya, for her part, was equally uncertain. She had come into this marriage with no illusions about what it was. This was a lifeline, not a fairy tale. She had hoped to find some warmth in Richard, but that hope was quickly dashed as she saw the coldness in his eyes, the distance in his demeanor. She wasn't surprised. She had prepared herself for this. But that didn't make the emptiness she felt any less real. After the ceremony, the reception was a blur. Richard remained distant, talking to his business partners, making small talk with his high-profile guests. Maya, too, found herself drifting through the crowd, a stranger in this world of luxury. She was grateful for the wealth that came with her new status, but it did nothing to fill the hollow feeling inside her. It wasn't until later in the evening, when the last of the guests had left, that Richard finally spoke to her. He found her standing alone in the corner of the ballroom, staring out at the city lights. She looked different now, softer somehow, though still distant. "You did well tonight," he said, his voice lacking the usual edge of condescension. Maya turned to face him, surprised by his words. She had expected indifference, or worse, disdain. "Thank you," she replied, her voice quieter than usual. She wasn't sure if he meant it, or if it was just another formality. Richard stood there for a moment, studying her. There was a strange tension in the air, something that made him pause. It was like he was seeing her for the first time, really seeing her. "I know this isn't what either of us expected," he said, his tone softer now. "But we'll make it work. For the sake of the family." Maya nodded, though her mind raced. Make it work? Was that what he thought this was? A business deal to be maintained? She wanted to believe he meant more, that there was more to their marriage than just appearances, but she had no reason to think that way. She was nothing more than a pawn in his world. But then, as the days passed, something unexpected happened. Maya began to notice small changes in Richard. At first, it was just little things. He would open the door for her without being asked, or offer her a cup of tea when he saw her sitting alone in the living room. These were gestures that, to anyone else, would seem insignificant. But to Maya, they were like cracks in the armor that Richard had built around himself. He wasn't the same man he had been on their wedding day. There was something vulnerable about him, something that hadn't been there before. Maya started to feel the same pull toward him that she had once felt toward the idea of love. It was confusing, and she didn't want to admit it, but the more she saw these small acts of kindness, the more she wondered if there was something more to this marriage than either of them had expected. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Richard returned home to find Maya sitting in the garden, sketching in her notebook. He paused, watching her from the doorway. She was so immersed in her work that she didn't notice him at first. Her hair fell loosely around her shoulders, and her concentration was so intense that it softened the edges of her features. Richard felt a strange ache in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. The loneliness he had buried deep inside seemed to surface for the first time. "What are you drawing?" he asked, stepping closer. Maya looked up, startled, then smiled as she closed her notebook. "Just some ideas for a project," she replied, her voice calm but warm. "I've always loved art. It's the one thing that makes me feel alive." Richard was quiet for a moment. He wanted to ask more, to know more about her, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he simply nodded. "I'm sure you'll do something amazing with it," he said, surprising even himself with the sincerity of his words. For the first time since their wedding, Maya felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this marriage wasn't as cold as she had thought. Maybe, it was more than just a contract. Over the next few weeks, they spent more time together. Richard started to open up to her, telling her about his past, about the loneliness he had hidden behind his wealth and success. Maya, in turn, shared her dreams and her fears. They began to build something that was no longer just a facade. They were beginning to care for each other. But even as their connection grew, there was still a part of Richard that resisted. He couldn't let go of the walls he had built around himself. And Maya, despite her growing feelings, still couldn't shake the fear that this was all just a lie, that she would be discarded when Richard had no more use for her. But as they continued to navigate their new life together, one thing became clear. They were no longer just strangers in a marriage of convenience. Something real was starting to form between them, something neither of them had expected. And that, perhaps, was the most dangerous thing of all. It had been a month since Richard and Maya's wedding, and while their relationship had progressed in unexpected ways, there was still a sense of tension in the air. Richard found himself thinking about Maya more than he cared to admit. The small acts of kindness, the genuine smile she gave him when they shared a quiet dinner, had started to mean more to him. Yet, he couldn't shake off the part of him that had always kept emotions at bay. He had built walls so high around his heart that he couldn't quite decide if he was ready to let them come down. Maya, on the other hand, was starting to see a side of Richard she never imagined existed. When they first married, she thought she was marrying a cold, detached billionaire who only cared about power and money. But now, she was discovering that there was so much more to him. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Maya noticed Richard staring at her with an intensity she wasn't used to. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, wondering if he was about to say something important. "Maya," Richard said slowly, his voice softer than usual, "I know we didn't start this marriage with any expectations of love, but I can't deny that things are changing. I didn't expect to feel this way." Maya's heart skipped a beat as she looked at him, unsure of how to respond. She had been hoping for this moment, but now that it was happening, she was afraid it was just another fleeting feeling. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard ran a hand through his hair, his usual confidence wavering for the first time since they'd met. "I've been pushing it away for weeks, but every time I see you, hear your voice, or even just watch you draw in your sketchbook, I feel something." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "Something I haven't felt in a long time, Maya. I don't want to admit it, but I think I'm starting to care about you." Maya was stunned into silence. She had hoped for this moment, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure how to react. She had been guarding her heart, too afraid to fully believe in what was happening between them. "You're not just saying that because we're married, are you?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. Richard shook his head. "No, Maya. I'm saying it because I mean it. I don't know what's happening between us, but it's real. And I think I'm falling for you." Maya felt a wave of emotions flood through her. Part of her wanted to run, to protect herself from the possibility of getting hurt, but another part of her longed to believe in this connection they were building. She had never imagined that her arranged marriage, a deal built on convenience, would lead to something so unexpected. "I'm scared too," Maya confessed, her voice barely audible. "I've been keeping my distance because I didn't think you could ever care for me, but now, I don't know what to believe anymore." Richard took a step closer to her, his expression sincere. "You don't have to be scared, Maya. I'm not perfect, and I've made mistakes, but I'm trying to be better, and I want to try, with you." Maya looked into his eyes, and for the first time since their wedding, she saw the vulnerability in him. She saw the man who had been hiding behind his wealth and cold exterior, the man who, despite everything, was willing to open up. I don't know if I can believe in this yet, Richard, Maya said, her voice soft but firm. But I'm willing to give us a chance. Richard smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him in weeks. That's all I'm asking for, he said quietly. The next few days were filled with small, meaningful moments that slowly started to build trust between them. Richard took Maya to an art gallery, where they spent hours discussing the paintings and sculptures that caught their attention. Maya was surprised by how much he listened to her opinions, how much he seemed to care about what she had to say. It was a side of Richard she hadn't seen before, and it made her heart flutter. On their way home, Richard reached for her hand, his grip tentative but warm. Maya looked up at him, her heart racing. I'm not sure where this is going, she said, her voice uncertain. But I'm glad we're taking this step. Richard nodded, squeezing her hand gently. Me too. As the days went by, they continued to spend time together, getting to know each other in a way they never had before. Richard began to open up about his childhood, about the loneliness he had felt growing up without the love of his parents. Maya, in turn, shared her own struggles and dreams, her desire to one day open her own art studio. It was a simple dream, but it was hers, and Richard saw the passion in her eyes when she spoke about it. He admired her for that. One evening, after dinner, Richard surprised Maya by bringing out a small sketchbook he had found in her room. I didn't know you liked to draw, he said, his voice full of curiosity. Maya blushed, her heart warming at the gesture. I haven't had much time for it lately, she admitted. But it's something I've always loved to do. Richard smiled. Then let's make time for it. I want to see your work. Maya felt a rush of emotion. Here was Richard, the man she had once thought of as cold and detached, now encouraging her to pursue her passion. It was a moment that felt like a turning point in their relationship, a sign that things were slowly changing. As the night drew to a close, Maya sat beside Richard, sketching quietly as he read a book. It was a simple, peaceful moment, but for Maya, it was everything. In that moment, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she had found something real. But even as she felt a sense of hope building inside her, she couldn't help but wonder, was this the start of something truly meaningful, or was it just another fleeting moment in a marriage that had started out as a lie? Only time would tell. The days following their conversation marked a shift in Richard and Maya's relationship. They spent more time together, discovering each other in ways that were once unimaginable. Richard had never imagined that he could connect with anyone the way he had started to connect with Maya. There were still moments of doubt, moments when he wanted to retreat into his comfortable, emotionless world, but Maya's presence kept pulling him back. She was not just a wife in name. She was becoming someone he could rely on. The more time they spent together, the more he began to question his own feelings, his own heart. He found himself smiling more often, laughing at things he would have normally brushed off. And in those moments, he realized something important. He was changing. Maya, on the other hand, was beginning to open her heart as well. At first, she had feared that Richard's kindness was simply a product of their marriage contract, something he had to do to fulfill his obligations. But now, she saw his gestures as genuine. The way he listened to her talk about her dreams, the way he cared for her in small, thoughtful ways, was more than just surface level. He was starting to see her, to value her for who she was, not just for the role she played in his life. One afternoon, as they walked through the garden of their estate, Maya found herself thinking about her future. She had dreamed of opening an art studio, a place where she could express herself, a place where her art could breathe and grow. But now, as she stood beside Richard, her heart filled with a mix of hope and fear. Would this new connection with him change her dreams? Would she still want the same things for herself? Richard seemed to sense her uncertainty. What are you thinking about? He asked, his voice low and calm. Maya paused, unsure of how to put her feelings into words. I've been thinking about my art, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I've always dreamed of opening a studio, but now, I don't. No, it feels like everything is changing, and I'm not sure if my dream still fits into this new reality. Richard stopped walking, turning to face her. He looked at her with such intensity that it made her heart skip a beat. Maya, whatever you choose, I want you to know that I support you. I may not have understood what it meant to follow your dreams before, but I see it now. And I want you to have the space to do it, to build the life you've always wanted. Maya felt her chest tighten as she looked at him. Richard, the man she had married out of necessity, was showing her something she had never expected. He wasn't just offering her a marriage, he was offering her a future. A future where she could have both love and her dreams. "You really mean that?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. Richard nodded, his expression softening. "Yes, I do. I never realized how important it was to have something to fight for until now. And I want to fight for your happiness, for both of us." His words hit her harder than she expected. For so long, she had guarded her heart, afraid to hope for something real, afraid that it would all slip away. But now, she felt a warmth spread through her chest, a warmth that came from the realization that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone in this anymore. Richard wasn't just her husband in name. He was starting to become her partner, her equal. As the days went on, Maya began to take small steps toward her dream. She started sketching again, creating pieces that felt more alive than anything she had made in the past. Richard was there, encouraging her every step of the way. He even took her to art galleries, letting her talk freely about her ideas, her vision for the future. It was in these moments that Maya realized how much she had changed as well. The walls she had built around herself were starting to come down. She had always thought she was just a pawn in someone else's game. But now, she saw that she had a voice, a place in this world. She wasn't just Richard's wife. She was Maya Thompson, a woman with her own dreams and her own strength. And for the first time in a long time, she believed in those dreams again. But even as their connection deepened, there were still challenges to face. Richard had his own fears, his own reservations about opening up fully. The walls he had built over the years didn't come down easily. There were times when he would retreat into himself, moments when he would pull away from Maya, just as he had done before. But each time, Maya was there, reminding him that they were in this together. And little by little, Richard began to trust in what they were building. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy, but it was real. And that, Maya realized, was the most important thing of all. One evening, after a quiet dinner together, Richard turned to her with a serious expression. "Maya," he said, his voice steady, "there's something I've been meaning to ask you." Maya looked at him, her heart racing with anticipation. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard took a deep breath, his eyes locking onto hers. "Would you consider making this marriage real?" Maya's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected those words, but now that they were spoken, she realized how much she had longed to hear them. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. "I mean, would you be willing to let go of the past and trust me?" Richard said, his voice softer now. "I know I've been distant, and I know this marriage didn't start the way it should have. But I want to make it real. I want to be with you, Maya. Not because of obligation, but because I love you." Maya's heart soared at his words. For so long, she had been afraid to let herself believe in love. But now, standing here with Richard, she realized that it was no longer just a dream. It was something she could have. Something they could have. "Yes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll trust you." Richard's smile was warm, genuine, and for the first time, Maya felt the weight of their marriage lifting. It wasn't just a contract anymore. It was a promise. A promise that they were in this together, and that love, real love, had finally found its way into their hearts. It had been a few months since Richard and Maya had openly acknowledged the shift in their relationship. What started as a contract, something neither of them believed could turn into anything real, had evolved into something neither of them could ignore. Richard found himself thinking about Maya constantly, in ways he had never imagined. She was no longer just a wife in name. She was a woman who had brought warmth into his life, a warmth he had thought he'd lost forever. Maya, too, had begun to see Richard differently. The walls he had once built around himself were slowly starting to crumble, and she was seeing a side of him that was vulnerable, human. It was in the small moments, those simple gestures, that Maya realized how much he had changed. One evening, after a quiet dinner at home, Richard turned to her with an unreadable expression. Maya had been sketching at the table, something she had done every day since Richard encouraged her to pursue her art. She had not expected what came next. "Maya," Richard started, his voice calm, "I've been thinking." Maya looked up from her sketchbook, her heart skipping a beat. "About what?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard hesitated for a moment before speaking again, his words slow, deliberate. "About us." About everything we've been through. Maya felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She had known they were getting closer, but she couldn't shake the fear that this moment might be too much too soon. What do you mean? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Richard's eyes softened as he reached across the table and took her hand in his. I don't want to go on living a life where I'm constantly holding back, he said, his voice filled with sincerity. I know I've kept myself guarded for a long time, but I don't want to do that with you anymore. You've shown me what it means to live fully, to care deeply, and I want to keep building that with you. Maya's breath caught in her throat. For so long, she had been the one to hold back, to protect herself from the hurt of false hope. But Richard, in his quiet, steady way, had shown her that there was more to this life than fear. Richard, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I've been scared too. But now, I realize that I don't want to be scared anymore. I want to believe in us. The words came out before she even had the chance to fully process them. But as soon as they were spoken, it felt like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. She hadn't realized how much she had been holding on to, how much she had been afraid of truly letting go. Richard smiled, a smile that wasn't just polite or formal, but one that reached his eyes. It was a smile that made Maya's heart swell with warmth, a smile that made her realize just how far they had come. I'm glad you feel the same, Richard said quietly. I've been thinking about our future, about what it could be if we really gave it everything. And I want that with you, Maya. Not because it's convenient or because it's expected, but because I want to build a life with you. Maya felt tears well up in her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. I want that too, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. I want to build something real, something that's ours. As the days passed, they both made an effort to continue opening up to each other, letting go of the walls they had spent so long building. They spent time together, not as a married couple with an obligation to fulfill, but as two people who had found something unexpected in each other. Richard started to share more about his past, about the pressures he had faced, the loneliness he had carried with him for so long. Maya, in turn, talked more about her childhood, about her dreams, and about her fears. They weren't perfect, but they were real, and for both of them, that was enough. One weekend, Richard surprised Maya by taking her to an art exhibition. It was a small event, hosted in a gallery downtown, but it meant the world to her. As they walked through the exhibit, Maya couldn't help but feel a surge of gratitude. She had never imagined that Richard, the man who had once seemed so distant, would be the one to support her passion for art. What do you think? She asked him as they stopped in front of a painting she admired. Richard stood beside her, looking at the piece with interest. I think it's beautiful, he said, his voice sincere. I've never really understood art the way you do, but I can see why it's so important to you. Maya smiled, her heart swelling with warmth. It wasn't just the art that was important to her. It was the fact that Richard was taking the time to understand it, to understand her. Thank you, she said softly. Richard looked at her, his eyes softening. No, thank you, Maya, for showing me what really matters. For showing me that there's more to life than just business and success. Maya's heart skipped a beat. I'm glad I could help, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I never thought we'd get here, but now that we're here, I don't want to let go. Richard squeezed her hand, his smile gentle but full of warmth. Neither do I, he replied. As they left the gallery that evening, Maya couldn't help but feel a sense of peace settle over her. She had spent so much of her life afraid of being hurt, of opening her heart to someone who might never love her back. But with Richard, it was different. This wasn't a fairy tale, and it wasn't perfect, but it was real. And that was all she needed. As they walked into the night, hand in hand, Maya knew that this was only the beginning of their story, and she couldn't wait to see where it would take them. It had been several months since Richard and Maya had made the decision to trust each other, and their relationship had grown in ways neither of them had anticipated. What started as a marriage of convenience, a contract to fulfill family expectations, had evolved into something deeper, something more real. Richard had never thought he would be capable of feeling the way he did now. The walls he had spent years building to protect himself from the world were slowly crumbling, and it was Maya who had shown him that there was more to life than wealth and status. She had opened a door in his heart that he never even knew existed, and now, he couldn't imagine his life without her. Maya, too, had changed. The woman who had entered the marriage with fear and skepticism, unsure of her place in Richard's world, had grown into someone who was confident in her own right. Her passion for art had taken center stage in her life, and with Richard's encouragement, she had started to plan for the studio she had always dreamed of. Her connection with Richard had blossomed into something far beyond what she had ever expected, and despite the rocky start, she realized that she was truly falling in love with him. One evening, as they sat together on the balcony of their home, the city lights twinkling in the distance, Richard turned to Maya with a serious look in his eyes. He had something on his mind, something that had been weighing on him for a while. "Maya," he began, his voice soft but steady. "There's something I need to tell you." Maya looked up from her sketchbook, her heart beating a little faster. She had become so used to Richard's presence, so comfortable with him, that she couldn't imagine what this could be about. "What is it?" she asked, her voice gentle, almost hesitant. Richard took a deep breath, his fingers nervously tapping on the armrest of the chair. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about everything we've been through, and I've realized that I don't want to waste any more time. I don't want to live my life with regrets, wondering what might have been." Maya's pulse quickened. She could feel the weight of his words, and it made her heart race with both excitement and fear. "What are you saying?" she whispered, her eyes locking onto his. Richard reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "What I'm saying is that I want us to build a life together, Maya. Not just a marriage, but a real life. A future. A family." Maya's breath caught in her throat. For a moment, she couldn't speak, couldn't believe what he was saying. This wasn't the Richard she had married, the man who had been so focused on business and appearances. This was a man who was opening his heart to her, who was asking her to share a life with him. "You mean, you want to have a family?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard nodded, his expression softening. "Yes, I do. I've spent so much time chasing success, chasing things that didn't really matter, that I almost forgot what really matters in life. And what matters, Maya, is you. It's us." Tears welled up in Maya's eyes as she listened to him. She had always dreamed of having a family, but she never thought it would happen like this. She never imagined that the man she had once thought of as cold and distant would be the one to offer her this future. "I've been so scared," Maya confessed, her voice shaking. "Scared that this was all just a dream, that it would all fall apart. But now, hearing you say that, I realize that I want this too. I want a future with you. I want to build something real." Richard gently cupped her face in his hands, his thumb brushing away a tear that had slipped down her cheek. "You don't have to be scared anymore, Maya," he said softly. "We're in this together, and we'll build that future step by step. I promise you." Maya leaned into his touch, her heart swelling with love. She had never imagined that her life could turn out this way, that a marriage that had started out of necessity could become something so meaningful, so beautiful. And yet, here they were, standing on the brink of a new chapter, one filled with promise and hope. As the days passed, Richard and Maya began to make plans for the future. They started looking at homes together, discussing where they wanted to live, where they would build the life they dreamed of. Maya continued to pursue her art, and with Richard's unwavering support, she began to make strides toward opening her own studio. It wasn't easy, but with each passing day, they were building a foundation, not just for their future as a couple, but for a family, a life that was truly theirs. One evening, as they sat together in their living room, Richard took Maya's hand once again. "Maya," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion, "I can't wait for the future we're going to create together. I'm so proud of everything you've accomplished, and I'm so grateful that you're here with me." Maya looked at him, her heart overflowing with emotion. "I feel the same way, Richard," she said softly. "I've never felt more at home than I do with you. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Richard smiled, pulling her close and wrapping his arms around her. "Together," he repeated, as if the word itself held the key to everything they had both been searching for. In that moment, as they held each other, Maya realized that this was what love was supposed to feel like: real, imperfect, and full of promise. They had come so far, from two strangers bound by circumstance to two people who had found something beautiful in each other. And as they looked toward the future, they knew that no matter what came their way, they would face it hand in hand, creating a life that was truly their own. It had been several months since Richard and Maya had made the decision to open up to each other, to let down the walls that had once kept them distant. Their marriage, which had begun as a business arrangement, had transformed into something real, something neither of them had expected. As their relationship deepened, Maya found herself more and more in love with the man Richard was becoming, while Richard, too, began to realize just how much he had come to depend on her, how much he had come to care for her. One evening, as they sat on the terrace of their home, the sunset casting a warm glow over the garden, Richard turned to Maya with a serious expression on his face. "Maya," he said, his voice steady but filled with a kind of vulnerability she had never heard before. "I've been thinking about something, and I think it's time we talked about it." Maya looked at him, her heart fluttering with anticipation. "What is it?" she asked softly, sensing the weight of his words. Richard took a deep breath, his gaze never leaving hers. "I know we've both been working hard to build a life together, and I know that this wasn't what we expected when we first got married. But I want to be honest with you. I want to make sure we're both on the same page." Maya's heart raced as she listened to him, but she remained quiet, waiting for him to continue. "I've been thinking about our future," Richard went on, his voice full of emotion, "about what comes next for us. And I've realized that I don't want to wait anymore. I don't want to keep living in the shadows of the past. I want to build something that's lasting, something that's truly ours." Maya felt a wave of emotion wash over her as she heard his words. It was as if the last few months had led them to this point, this moment of truth. She had always feared that their love would be fleeting, that the uncertainty of their beginnings would eventually pull them apart. But now, hearing Richard's words, she realized how wrong she had been. "Richard, what are you saying?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly, her heart full of hope. Richard looked at her, his eyes softening. "What I'm saying is that I want to make this marriage real, Maya. I want us to have a family, to build a life together that's more than just business or convenience. I want us to have everything we've dreamed of, together." Maya's breath caught in her throat as she processed what he was saying. He was asking for more than just a future. He was asking her to believe in the possibility of love, of a life that was truly shared. It was the thing she had always wanted, the thing she had feared would never come. "You want to have a family?" she whispered, her eyes searching his for any hint of hesitation. Richard nodded, his expression steady. "Yes, I do. I know this wasn't how we planned it, but I'm not going to waste any more time. I want us to have everything we've talked about, our future, our dreams, and yes, a family." Maya felt a lump form in her throat, but this time, it wasn't fear, it was hope. Hope that everything they had been building was real. Hope that the love she had always longed for was finally within reach. "I want that too, Richard," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I want to build a life with you, and I want to start that with a family. I'm ready." Richard's eyes lit up with a mixture of relief and joy as he reached for her hand. "You're sure?" he asked, his voice almost too soft to hear. Maya smiled, squeezing his hand gently. "I'm sure," she replied. As the weeks passed, Richard and Maya began to make plans for their future. They looked into expanding their home, creating a space that would accommodate the life they envisioned together. Maya continued to pursue her art, taking the steps necessary to open her own studio, a dream that had always seemed so far away but was now within reach. Richard supported her every step of the way, attending gallery events with her and helping her network with people who could help bring her vision to life. Their connection grew deeper, and with each passing day, Maya saw more and more of the man Richard had become. He was no longer the distant, cold businessman she had first met. He was someone who valued family, who was capable of love, and who wanted to build a life with her. One evening, as they sat in their garden, the cool night air settling around them, Richard turned to Maya, his expression thoughtful. "Maya," he said, his voice low, "I've been thinking. We've come so far, but there's still so much we haven't done yet. I know we've been focused on the future, but I want to enjoy the present with you. I want to make every moment count." Maya looked at him, a smile spreading across her face. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice light with curiosity. Richard stood up, holding out his hand to her. "I mean," he said, his smile playful, "I think it's time for us to start living, truly living, in the moment. Let's take a break from all the plans and just enjoy each other. A spontaneous weekend getaway, just the two of us." Maya's heart fluttered at the thought. It was exactly what she had been wanting, to step away from the stress of building their future and just enjoy each other's company. "That sounds perfect," she said, standing up to take his hand. As they walked back to the house to pack for their getaway, Maya couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. For the first time in her life, she truly felt like she had everything she ever wanted. A loving husband, a future full of possibilities, and a life that was hers to create. And for the first time, she knew that everything they had was real. It wasn't just a contract. It wasn't just a marriage for convenience. It was a love story, one that had started with two strangers, but was now unfolding into something beautiful, something they had both always dreamed of. And with that, they set off on their journey, hand in hand, ready to face whatever came next, together. The days after their spontaneous getaway were some of the most peaceful and fulfilling Richard and Maya had ever experienced. They had spent time exploring new places, reconnecting with each other, and truly savoring the moments they once took for granted. It was during this time that they discovered just how deeply their bond had grown. The idea of a future together no longer seemed like a distant dream. It felt tangible, something they could grasp, something they could build together. As they returned to their daily lives, they both knew things had changed in the most beautiful way possible. Richard, the once distant businessman who had kept his heart locked away for so long, was now a man who embraced vulnerability, someone who was learning to love in a way he never had before. Maya, who had entered the marriage as a reluctant partner, now felt an undeniable sense of belonging. She had found not only a husband but a partner in every sense of the word, someone who was as invested in her dreams as she was in his. One evening, as they sat on the couch together, Richard reached over to take Maya's hand. There was something in his eyes, something that made her heart skip a beat. She knew he was about to say something important, and the anticipation made her stomach flutter. "Maya," he began, his voice soft but steady, "I've been thinking. We've come so far, and I'm proud of everything we've built together. But there's something I want to ask you, something that's been on my mind for a while." Maya looked at him, her heart racing. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Richard smiled gently, his thumb brushing over her hand. "I know we've talked about our future, about the life we want to create, but I want to make sure we're both ready for the next step. I don't want to waste any more time." Maya's pulse quickened as she realized what he was getting at. She had always wondered when this moment would come, when they would take the next step in their relationship, and now, it seemed that moment was finally here. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to steady her voice. Richard took a deep breath before continuing. "I want to ask you something that's more than just words, more than just a promise. I want to ask you to spend the rest of your life with me, to make this official in every way possible." Maya's breath caught in her throat as the weight of his words settled over her. For a moment, she couldn't speak, couldn't move. She had never imagined that Richard would ask her this, but now that he had, she realized that it was everything she had ever wanted. She had found her home, not in a place, but in him. "Richard," she whispered, her voice full of emotion, "are you sure? After everything we've been through, do you really want this?" Richard's eyes softened, and he gently cupped her face in his hands. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Maya, you've shown me what real love is, and I want to spend the rest of my life showing you that same love. I want to build a family with you, a future we can share, and I want to do that with you by my side, forever." Maya felt tears spring to her eyes as she looked into Richard's eyes. For so long, she had been afraid of being hurt, of giving her heart to someone who might not return it. But here, in this moment, with Richard, she felt nothing but certainty. This was real. This was the love she had always dreamed of. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Richard. I want to spend my life with you." Richard smiled, his eyes bright with joy as he pulled her into his arms. "I promise you, Maya, this is just the beginning. We're going to build a life together, one filled with love, laughter, and everything we've ever dreamed of." As they embraced, Maya felt a sense of peace settle over her, a peace she had never known before. She had found the love she had always hoped for, the kind of love that filled every corner of her heart, the kind of love that made everything else fade away. As the weeks passed, Richard and Maya continued to plan for their future. They made decisions about where they would live, how they would raise their family, and what kind of life they wanted to create together. It wasn't always easy. There were challenges, moments of doubt, but they faced them all with a united front, knowing that as long as they were together, they could overcome anything. One evening, as they sat at the kitchen table, Richard looked at Maya with a thoughtful expression. "You know," he said, "I've been thinking about how much we've grown, how much we've learned about each other. And I think it's time we take the next step." Maya raised an eyebrow. Her curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" she asked. Richard reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Maya's heart skipped a beat as she realized what was happening. Richard opened the box to reveal a beautiful engagement ring, its diamonds sparkling in the soft light of the kitchen. "Maya," he said, his voice steady, "I want to marry you, not just because it's what's expected, but because I love you. You've changed my life in ways I never thought possible, and I want to make this official. Will you marry me?" Maya's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the ring, at Richard, at the life they had built together. This was the moment she had always dreamed of, the moment she knew would change everything. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you." Richard slipped the ring onto her finger, and in that moment, as they held each other, they both knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with love, laughter, and everything they had ever hoped for. Together, they would face whatever came their way, and they would do it as partners, as equals, as a family. Months passed since Richard and Maya's engagement, and life together felt more fulfilling with each passing day. They had moved into a new home, a place that symbolized the new beginning they had built together. The house wasn't just a roof over their heads. It was the foundation of their future. Richard and Maya spent countless hours designing their home, filling it with love and memories they would cherish forever. They had become partners in every sense of the word, sharing dreams, supporting each other, and learning to love in ways neither of them had thought possible. Richard was no longer the man he had once been, the man who lived in the shadows of his wealth and status. He had learned to embrace the messy, imperfect side of life, the side that Maya had shown him. He had learned that love wasn't something you could control, and that sometimes the best things in life came when you least expected them. Maya, too, had found herself changed by the love she shared with Richard. She had come into this marriage with a guarded heart, unsure of what the future would hold. But now, she was confident in the life they were building together. Her art had flourished, and with Richard's support, she had opened her own studio, a dream she had once thought was too far out of reach. She was no longer just Richard's wife. She was Maya Thompson, an artist, a woman with her own purpose, her own voice. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of their home, the warm breeze carrying the sounds of the city below, Richard turned to Maya with a serious expression. They had spent the day with their families, celebrating the holidays together, and now, as the sun set behind the horizon, Richard felt a sense of calm he hadn't experienced before. "Maya," he said softly, his voice filled with love, "there's something I've been thinking about. We've come so far, and I'm so proud of everything we've built together. But I think it's time to take the next step." Maya looked at him, her heart racing, as she sensed the weight of his words. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice calm, but her mind racing with possibilities. Richard took a deep breath, as if gathering his thoughts. "I want to make sure we don't lose sight of the love we've built. I don't want to take it for granted. I want to keep making memories with you, not just for the sake of our future, but because each day with you is something I treasure. I don't want to wait anymore to fully live our lives." Maya's eyes filled with tears as she listened to him. She had always believed in love, but with Richard, it had become something more than she could have imagined. He had taught her that love wasn't just an emotion. It was a commitment, a choice you made every day. "Richard," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "I feel the same way. I don't want to take any more time for granted. Every moment with you has been a gift, and I want to make the most of it, together." Richard smiled, the warmth of his love radiating from him. "Then, let's make it official," he said, his voice steady. "Let's make this life we've built, this family we're creating, something permanent. I want to renew my vows. To you, Maya, I want to stand before you again and promise you that no matter what comes our way, I will always love you. I will always choose you." Maya's heart skipped a beat. She had never expected this, but now that it was happening, she knew this was the moment they had both been waiting for. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Richard. I would love that." The next few weeks were filled with excitement and planning, as they made arrangements for their vow renewal ceremony. It wasn't a grand affair, just a simple gathering of family and close friends. They didn't need anything extravagant. The love they had for each other was all they needed. On the day of the ceremony, as Richard and Maya stood hand in hand, surrounded by the people they loved, Richard looked into Maya's eyes, his heart full of emotion. "Maya," he said, his voice steady but filled with love, "I vow to always cherish you, to honor you, to support you in all that you do. I promise to be the man you deserve, to love you with everything I have, for as long as I live." Maya smiled, her eyes filled with tears of joy. "I vow to always stand by your side, to love you even in the hardest moments, and to build a life with you that is full of love, laughter, and memories we'll cherish forever. I promise to always choose you, Richard, no matter what." As they exchanged their vows, Richard and Maya knew that this was not just a renewal of their commitment to each other. It was a celebration of the life they had built together, the love they had found, and the future they would continue to create. The ceremony ended with laughter, hugs, and tears as their family and friends cheered them on. Maya and Richard shared a quiet moment, just the two of them, as they looked out at the horizon, hand in hand. "This is just the beginning, Maya," Richard said softly, his voice filled with hope. "Our story is far from over." Maya smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "I know," she said, "and I can't wait to see where it takes us." As they stood there, together, looking toward the future, they knew that no matter what challenges life would throw their way, they would face them together as a family, with love as their foundation. And with that, they stepped into the next chapter of their journey, ready for whatever came next, knowing that their love would carry them through. Together, forever.